Hi guys, welcome to RootStem, and on today's video we're going to talk about Warhammer 40k 9th edition. We're going to talk about the rules for 9th edition, how we think it's going to affect the game, and the Games Workshop's response to the rules leaks. So I'm going to start off by talking casually about Games Workshop's release of the core rules. I didn't expect this, if I'm honest, but on the morning of yesterday, as recording this, a friend of mine actually shared all the pictures about the actual core rulebook that had come out, and I was actually pouring through those, having a look at the rules. They weren't the greatest quality, they're all mismatched and they're all in the wrong order, but I could still get the gist of what I was doing. I've been playing the game since tail end of Rogue Trader, so when a rule set comes out, I know how to read it. I know Games Workshop's format. You just got to make sure you read a lot of the words, because sometimes they can be taken too literally or not literally enough. And what I did notice when I was actually looking at this, I got an email that said Warhammer 40k across the top from Games Workshop. I basically just said core rules released, and I thought, oh yeah, I'm gonna have to watch for Twitch on this one. And then when I did watch for Twitch on that one, it was a bit of a salty one. Someone complaining about people looking at the rules and reading the rules. And I'll be honest, if Games Workshop had just released the core rules themselves, you probably wouldn't have had this type of issue, but they probably wanted to have it all waited for a mass release, and then someone's gone and spoilt it for them. They're going to spoilt it for me as well, because I was set on getting a copy of 9th edition early and doing a battle report about it, and now I can't, because of course it's all come out and then everyone else is going to be doing their own, so a bit of salt from me as well. I'm going to talk about the core rules, but I'm also going to talk about the advanced rules that was found on the leaks as well. I'm going to try and get them both together if I possibly can. Now, one of the things I'm going to talk about before we look at the actual movement phase, I'm going to do it command phase actually, which is going to be the new start to the 9th edition of 40k, is the fact that they've clarified additions, subtractions, multiplications, and divisions. Sorry, I've said divisions twice now. This is new for them. A lot of the rules, when I'm reading it, it's 26 pages. To be honest with you, 25 pages of rules, 26 pages just a map that just shows you how to deploy for the actual mission that's on the core rules. But a lot of it is what I call waffle, and it's just confirming certain things. Like there's a section about being wholly within or within, which basically has to clarify what all of that means. It feels like it's a rule set that's basically been done so that somebody cannot, or try not to, they'll find it, but cannot manipulate the rules because of wording. So the rules themselves are pretty much an update to 8th edition. It's a bit more like 8.1. If anyone's been playing 40k for as long as, I've been playing for years, Rogue Trader to 2nd edition was, again, it wasn't really an overhaul. It wasn't an overhaul of everything. They just removed certain aspects. They did change the data sheets, but they moved certain aspects, and it kind of became the next version of 40k. 2nd edition is where a lot of people actually played, because they managed to get hold of it in places like Argos, which was cheaper than buying it from Games Workshop. Don't ask why. But when it moved from 2nd edition to 3rd edition, this was a very drastic change in how the game played. And then from that point, the next editions of 40k were all kind of backwards compatible, right up to 7th. 7th edition was still compatible with, you could even still use some missions from the 4th, although I'll be honest, when you're playing narrative games, you can still use some of those missions in the newer version of 40k. So 9th edition is pretty much an 8.1. This is an update to the 8th edition, including some rules that a lot of us possibly felt that should have been included in the 8th edition from the get-go. Terrain rules, as an example, could have been put into a chapter approved. We didn't really need a whole new edition regarding it. But as Games Workshop has been going to tournaments this time round and has really been paying attention to its gamer base, I've got a funny feeling that the 9th edition of the game has been brought out to try and stop as many cheese players as possible. Also to make them more money. Now, to start the game off in 9th edition, you actually go through a series called a command phase. Now, the command phase itself is, at the moment, nothing. But I've got a funny feeling once codexes start coming out, that you're going to have a particular feel and flavour to certain things. Certain things are going to action in a command phase. It wouldn't surprise me if you go the Age of Sigmar route, where to action your abilities, you kind of need to spend command points and such in the command phase to be able to have them active and playing later on. But currently in a command phase, you earn a command point if you are a Battleforged army. Now, I'm not quite sure who doesn't use a Battleforged army in 40k, but some players do, because of course I've had to include rules in there that basically states that if somebody is using a non-Battleforged army, you don't get a command point. In fact, you don't get any command points at all. So the movement phase remains largely untouched. This is very similar to what we've seen already in 8th edition. Doesn't change much apart from a clarification on terrain. Terrain now, anything more than an inch high, you have to climb over. This is very similar to what they did with Age of Sigmar. So if you've got a 2-inch wall in front of you, you need to spend 4 inches of movement to get over that wall, because you've got to go 2 inch up and then 2 inch down. Also, units with the fly keyword have lost their ability to be able to shoot when they fall back. This isn't going to affect vehicles so much, because they're still going to be able to shoot in the shooting phase into units that they're in close combat with, but other units that rely on the fly keyword, like let's say the Space Marines Inceptors, is it Inceptors? The jumpy dudes, as Winters would tell you, they can no longer fall back and still shoot, so they're going to have to stay in combat if they're going to need to remain effective. And the strategic reserves have now become much more of a thing in this particular edition. You can now put units into strategic reserve without having to well, just by spending normal command points and not having to have a special ability. This is quite cool, if I'm completely honest. Although units can't turn up, there's a long list of when units can turn up and how they can turn up and where they can turn up, such as if you turn up on turn 3, you can set up on any other table edge except your opponent's, 9 inches away from enemy units and within 6 inches of that table edge. That's going to be pretty cool, especially for something like an outflanking vehicle or things of that nature. It's always nice to be able to see just a unit that can actually sort of swing that way, and it's going to create whole new opportunities when you're building your forces, that you're going to have certain units that are going to deep strike. I'm not sure, because I've not, even on the leaks, I've not been able to see anything that's putting in limitations for how many units you can actually put in reserve. Being a Genestealer Cult player as well as everything else that I play, it's nice to know where you can't actually have certain units, and it might be more beneficial for me to put certain units like Luminous Battle Tanks as an example, or Sentinels, into reserve using the command point system rather than actually having them on the field. Now, transports and aircraft also have their own little section. Transports basically just detailing what happens to units when they're inside a destroyed transport and how you get in and out of transports. This is not really changed. You're still going to be within 3 inches. There's no real change to the rules on this, if I'm honest. Aircraft have changed. I've got it open here so I can have a quick look. Aircraft have kind of changed, because what it is more of a clarification of what you can and can't do with aircraft, although having aircraft leave the battlefield and then come back on is actually in the strategic reserve rules and not mainly in the main rules, because it states that if you have to go off the field, then you're dead. I'll be honest, it doesn't really bother me. I like the fact that aircraft are now going to be a lot more powerful, simply because they're not going to have the -1 if they move. A lot of aircraft, Elder player, I do have aircraft, Imperial Guard player, I do have aircraft. When you moved with the aircraft, it was suddenly hitting on 5s, and there was no way you could mitigate that. It was always hitting on 5s because you had moved. Now, with a lot of the rules, you're going to be able to just move with your vehicles, with your aircraft. And I'm going to see a lot, I'll be honest with you, I'll probably see a lot more Guard players using some Valkyries in their forces, because they have actually become quite decent to use now. On the aircraft front, there's also clarifications regarding whether or not you know, when you're doing a consolidation or a piling move, you ignore aircraft. It's just little things that seem to be, again, been put in the rules to try and stop that salty commander or that cheese player from just basically trying to manipulate everything as best as it possibly can. The psychic phase remains relatively unchanged. They've still included the smite rules that they actually included in previous editions, where, not previous editions, in previous reworks, where it was a +1 if you was using multiple smites. Now it's in the main core rules. It feels like it's going to be in the more narrative games as well. I'm not quite sure what's going to be happening to narrative games. I quite enjoy playing the narrative games, but it does feel like Games Workshop's moving away more towards this crusade stuff, and it does, some of the missions that I've looked at look a bit more like narrative missions anyway, but we will see. So the psychic phase, again, largely unchanged. You still need to cast, you can still deny, and you can still Perils of the Warp, pretty much exactly the same as it was before. In the shooting phase, this particular phase has been left relatively untouched. There is a couple of exceptions. The exceptions being the rules that we've already seen for vehicles being able to shoot in combat, called Big Guns Never Tire. The fact that vehicles can now move and fire with heavy weapons is a big bonus, and it's going to be a lot to some of the smaller armies such as Gene Occult, Imperial Guard, even Orcs. Although a lot of Orc weapons are still actually an assault weapon, but the ability to be able to have any heavy weapons that they do actually have been able to move and fire without any penalty. This at one point was just the realm of things like Machine Spirit, but now that's the way of the dodo. That's pretty much going to be made redundant, but I'm guessing that the new points value when it initially comes out will change, and then of course in future codex releases they will see these units given a bit of an overhaul. So another addition, I'm not calling it change because it's more of an addition, another addition really to the shooting phase is how characters interact. You've still got your kind of characters that can hide in units, but they now have to be within 3 inches of a unit that contains 3 or more models, or a vehicle, or a monster, or something of that nature. You cannot just have your commander sat. So, for example, with the Space Marine ability to be able to change the commander's range or aura to 9 inches, you can no longer have him sat on his own with no support because he will get shot. You've got to make sure that they are going to be sticky. I think the 3-inch rule is mainly there to try and make it stick with units, although personally, I don't understand why they just didn't put that you could stick a character with a squad, have him become part of the squad, and then if he's on his own, he can be shot. That would make more sense and would be a lot less faffing about, but I digress. Weapon types are pretty much still the same. Of course, you've got the rules for blast that came out, which is, I believe, to be honest with you, is a welcome change. Although I don't agree with maximum number of shots. I think it should be whatever your dice is. If it's 6+ models, it should be 3, and if it's 11 or more models, it should be 6, or if you can't fire 6 shots, then whatever the maximum number of shots you can do. Some weapons, like for example Manticore from the Imperial Guard, if you're firing at a unit of orcs that are 15 strong, you're getting 12 dice guaranteed. If you're firing a wyvern, for example, at that unit, you're getting, what, 24 dice guaranteed? That is a big difference from 3 guaranteed to 24 guaranteed. To me, it should have been 0, 3, 6. But again, that's up to workshop. I suppose they've been play testing it. I haven't been play testing it, but we will see when we get to play the game ourselves. Now, before you get to the combat section, there is a section that states making attacks. This is mainly because I think the combat and the shooting, to hit, to wound, saving is all pretty much the same. So they've included it as one particular section. Now, the problem I have with this section is in the to hit rolls. In the to hit section, it states that a minus and a plus are not accumulative to hit. So -1 to hit is not accumulative with other minuses to hit. Now, my problem with that is when it comes to terrain. Now, I am skipping ahead. I'm going to be talking about terrain properly later, but there is something called dense terrain, which is basically a -1 to hit. So in some of the terrain aspects, like in woods as an example, and what the state as the Adeptus Mechanicus terrain features, it's a -1 to hit because it's classed as dense terrain, but it doesn't give you any other additional saves. The problem I have with this is that, yeah, it's -1 to hit. It's -1 to hit when you advance with an assault weapon still, because that's not changed. So some of these new, for example, I believe they're called Eradicators with this new melter weapon, can now run forward and shoot you through trees and only suffer 1 -1. No. To me, it should be a maximum of a -2. It shouldn't be -1. It should be, it's accumulative until a maximum of a -2. Simply because you are completely negating these new rules you've made for trees and woods and everything else by having, you can't accumulate. What is the point? What literally is the point of having woods if you can run around with assault weapons and it doesn't matter if you're in terrain or not? because effectively you're not having an additional minus. I don't get that. I really don't understand. It should have been a minus or a +2, I basically believe. Nothing higher than that. But yeah, you're basically knocking off a complete effect. I know why they're probably doing it is mainly sort of like certain units like Elder, one of the Elder Craft Worlds allows a -1 to hit if you're more than 12 inches away. So of course it stopped people from being -3 to hit. But when you're sticking a Chapter Master with your Space Marines, that don't matter. You're rerolling all your dice anyway. So in the fight phase or charge phase, we already know that you've changed how people can actually charge into combat. You can no longer multi-charge. Well, you can, but you've got to make sure that you can actually contact both units. This is again some little gaming sort of things that I've seen, but it's still moved towards the closest enemy model when it comes to piling in and consolidation. So people can still kind of try and string out a unit, try and engage other units. Everyone's going to be fought back, but still going to be able to try and engage other units. I'm not sure. I think the consolidating piling should be you can consolidate and pile into the target unit. So if you've charged a unit, you can only consolidate and pile in towards models in that unit. That stops people from being able to lock down multiple things. But it's a tactic, and sometimes you've got to do that because 40k is quite a shooty game. And I'm honest, a lot of these rules that I am seeing, it's still quite a shooty game. One of the other changes, of course, is you need to be within half an inch to be able to fight. So basically now you've got to have a model that's within half inch of an enemy, and then to have an additional model help you fight, you've got to be within half inch of those guys. Again, I don't like that. I preferred the inch rule, if I'm completely honest, but we are trying to make it a smaller table. I won't be using the smaller table. I'll still be using my 6 foot by 4 foot. But they are trying to sort of make it more compact, make you more squished in. A bit more like Age of Sigmar, if I'm completely honest. And the half-inch rule, I'm not keen on. I much prefer it to be a straightforward 1 inch, 1 inch. And then, of course, combaters would actually get more of a chance to get more guys in there, especially orc units. When you finally do get the charge off, don't get me wrong, a lot of armies can't now overwatch unless you're using a stratagem. So if you're clever, you can pretty much get something in there, but having that half-inch rule means that all the attacks that you would normally get, you're not going to get anymore. They have been stating at the minute more balanced and more charge-based, but have they? I really don't think they have on this. I still think shooty armies are really going to have more of a benefit. So the rest of combat, if I'm honest, is completely the same as it was before. There's no real other changes apart from those. Again, the more I look at this, the more I'm starting to think to myself, what have you changed for the better? Now, morale has also done a bit of a change. This is actually a bit more convoluted, a bit more, not convoluted, a bit more complicated than it was before. Rather than just taking so many casualties and having everyone run off, so you know that squad is dealt with, they've actually come out with a nice little system. Basically, if you've not already seen it, if you still take your casualties, I'm still going to be putting the dice next to how many casualties I've taken from my morale. You roll a d6, you add the casualties, and if it's more than your leadership, you remove one model. Now, when you remove that model, if it does, so basically once you've removed that model, you then roll a d6 for every other model in the squad, and if you get I think it's a 1, that model is then removed as a casualty. And they've even put a clarification in there that you can do. There's nothing you can do to stop this from happening. There will be some special rules in books, like I'm believing there's some Adeptus Mechanicus have a rule where you can stop the unit from fleeing if you're one of the particular sub-factions. Well, that's quite nice because a unit could get hammered and hammered and hammered and hammered, and the majority of the men can still be there. Especially good for guard. But if you do remove that model, and by removing that model, it takes you below 50% starting strength, then on 1s and 2s, your models flee. So sometimes trying to pass that morale is still going to be as important as ever. They've also put in there as well, I believe, that if you roll I think it's if you roll a 1, you pass morale regardless. You instantly, you've succeeded to pass morale. So regardless of how many casualties you've taken, if you get that 1, that's your insane bravery. Now, in addition to this, in the morale phase, is unit coherency checks. So both players at the end of the turn have to check for coherency. And if units are out of coherency, you then have to remove models until the unit is in coherency. This is quite nice because it's when you're taking the casualties off. I have already seen the coherency rules regarding 6+ models where you have to be within, two models. If you've got one model, you're still going to be within two. And someone's put pictures up where they're kind of like showing a T-bone. That's not going to work. If you, at the end of your turn, have to take a coherency check, unless you're taking characters from one end or the other, you're very limited on who's going to be able to take casualties. So I'm pretty much seeing that people will be taking blocks. And I think that's pretty much going to be the way forward, is people taking a good block of men rather than stringing them out, which is never a great sight, really. Now, stratagems have also changed in the actual main game. We've got 7 core stratagems now, rather than the usual 3. You've still got your command reroll, but this has been severely limited. It is limited to certain things. Also, the command reroll now states that if you're rerolling a charge, you don't reroll that one dice, you reroll both dice. Again, I'm not sure if that's going to help charging armies. Close combat armies, I would have preferred it just to be for one dice. It would have meant that you probably would have got more of a guaranteed charge off. Overwatch is now in there as a stratagem, so that's one command point. Basically, automatically passing morale is still in there. That, I think, is 2 command points, but you can only use it once per battle. That is a very different change. Desperate Breakout is if you're wanting to basically get your units through or fall back through an enemy. I'll be honest, I've never really come across that, even in my games, but I suppose maybe on a smaller board you might. If you're going to be playing on a smaller board, that is. There's also one where if a unit does fall back, you've got a chance, you can roll a d6 per model. That now, it does state within engagement range. Now, engagement range in this is basically half an inch, and half an inch of somebody that's within half an inch. So a lot of people, when they saw the initial stratagem, thought, "Oh, I'm going to be able to have 30 boys in an orc mob firing." And that's not going to be the case anymore, really. You're probably going to have however many is in combat plus their backups. Maybe that's basically going to be able to fire on a unit. And again, it's engagement range, so if somebody's wily enough not to be within an inch, they can easily fall back and not suffer from that stratagem. Now, emergency disembarkation is an odd stratagem to have in there for a command point. Basically, if a vehicle is destroyed, you can disembark, but you can disembark up to 6 inches rather than it being a 3-inch. But there's more chance of the men that are getting out dying, so like you kind of get, you perish on a 1 or 2 rather than a 1. I don't know if I'm going to be using that unless I've got like a Spartan, maybe. That's got loads and loads of different units in, and then of course they have to come out, and the Spartan has to sort of disgorge the units. I'm not sure that it's going to be such a great idea. I'll be honest, I don't really see me using that one, if ever. Although you never know. Again, it's a smaller game, or supposed to be a smaller game. I'm still going to be playing on bigger tables, but we will see what these changes bring. Now we're on to terrain. And as an old school player, I am happy to see area terrain is back. It makes it a hell of a lot easier when you have a base to a piece of terrain and you're basically stating that anything that goes over it is affected. Although, having read this, there is some contradictions in the main rules set to what Games Workshop is putting out regarding their own models and figures. I clearly don't understand it myself, but I'm going to break it down. So Workshop is classifying 3 different things. You've got sort of hill type terrain, you've got obstacles, and then you've got area terrain. Again, area terrain is great. I like the fact that that's back. And you basically only get the benefit of cover in area terrain if you are infantry, beasts, or swarm. So you don't get it if you're a vehicle. But vehicles are getting quite a bit in this edition, so I don't mind that. I don't mind the fact that vehicles no longer actually get cover. Although some weapons are a little bit naughty, and well, I suppose, if you're behind an obscuring piece, you can't be shot anyway, so it doesn't really matter. It's all going to be about getting a drop on your opponent. Now, there's also, I am looking at my computer to see what there is obstacles, which I like the fact that they've clarified obstacles. Basically, obstacles give you cover if you are within 3 inches, unless a straight line can be drawn from the attacker to all parts of a target model without it passing over or through this terrain feature. So if you are behind, like a, if your model's taking cover behind a container as an example, or of course there is something that people are firing over and it's obscuring part of your actual base, then you are going to be able to get the benefit of cover from that. I like that. That clarifies a lot of the obstacle rules that we had a problem with in the previous edition, although I tended to put obstacles on a base. So what I'll probably do is to still put obstacles on we've got some flat bases at my club where we can just put items on them. If we just put items on there, it can count as obstacles, and possibly even count as maybe another category at the same time. So you've got the area, you've got the obstacles, you've got hills. Then you've got the mini clarifications of all of the different pieces. So the first one to talk about is Defensible. Now, it's already been mentioned, Defensible, by Games Workshop. This is basically, it's going to be an area terrain piece, although it says area terrain on there, but I have seen them apply Defensible to things like defense lines, which makes sense. So they are defensible, and you basically, with a defense line, you can choose if you're getting charged to either Overwatch on a 5+ if you're using a stratagem or if you've got an ability, or you can choose to have a +1 to hit in close combat. That's a pretty good choice, is that, if I'm completely honest, with a defensible piece of terrain. But then again, it's going to be clarifying what do you class as a defensible piece of terrain. Are hedges defensible? Because you could, effectively, well, it just depends. It just really does depend on what you are going to be doing. I think defensible might actually come into effect on a lot of pieces of terrain. Maybe not on like crates and stuff, but yeah, a lot of pieces might actually have that type of terrain associated to it. Defense line is next, and that's effectively just telling you what, it's just mitigating some of the rules regarding the 1/2 inch. So basically, if you can charge within 1 inch of a terrain feature, and you can attack anybody that's within 2 inch. If somebody's using that particular piece of terrain as cover, I like that idea. Again, you can use hedges as an example, because we've got a lot of mixed terrain at my club. Low walls for a good one would be on that there. Maybe even high walls would be a good one, depending on how high the wall is. So I don't mind that, because you're not allowed to get over, and of course it means it's going to be easier to charge people in a defensible position. But then you could apply some other special things to it while it's actually, while you've got that there, depending of course upon the type. Breachable is one of the other rules that's quite interesting. Basically, it states that infantry swarms and beasts can move through certain terrain features. So, like woods and ruins have breachable, so you can actually go through them. Well, it says, I'm using these as the examples that Games Workshop gives. So, to me, you should be able to pick and choose what your terrain is going to have. Don't get me wrong, I think if you're playing in tournaments, they're going to tell you, and I think as well in certain situations some people might be a bit funny with it. I personally, when I'm playing, I'll probably be using quite a lot of rules, because I think the game needs terrain to mitigate a lot of what is happening. So you'll be able to it mainly means you can go through the wall, rather than having to go up and over. So you're not having to find that hole. You can create your own hole and go through the terrain feature with your models. Next, you've got dense cover. Now, this is the one that's going to give you a -1 to hit if you have to draw a line over or through the actual terrain piece. So if it's an obstacle or a line, you've got to go fire over it. There is a certain rule that says that if you can see all of your opponent's base, which is kind of like taken from Necromunda, then that dense cover is mitigated. You're still going to be able to shoot at them. That applies as well for certain obstacles. And it states that the terrain has to be at least 3 inches in height. But then on some of the examples that it gives, I know for a fact that one of the examples it gives, the piece of terrain is not 3 inches in height. So, but I'm not quite sure what's happening. But it does say that if the terrain is 3 inches, it's dense cover. Whether or not, I honestly think you're just going to be able to pick your own keywords, which is just going to make the game so much easier, if I'm perfectly honest. But dense cover, -1 to hit. Because of the accumulation, that cover is going to be mitigated by certain things. So if you're moving with a heavy weapon and you're firing that heavy weapon, it's -1 because if you're in infantry, it's -1 because you're firing a heavy weapon. Then it's -1 for the dense cover, but you're not allowed to have 2 accumulations, so it just becomes a -1. And then you start thinking to yourself, well, what is the point of having the dense cover against certain army types, like orcs as an example? Although 6 is always a hit regardless, but those new eradicators being able to move, I think it's 4 or 5 inches, then run, so I call it run, advance, so you're plussing an extra d6 to it, and then still being able to fire with the -1. And if you're in dense cover, it's only the -1. There's not going to be any accumulation. So then, of course, the dense cover is kind of mitigated and is not really a thing. So I'm hoping they'll clarify that later on, where it's like it's a -1 to hit, but dense cover, you know, adds to it. That's the only one. But I still think it should be a maximum -2. Unstable position and exposed position are kind of very easy to explain. Unstable position is basically stating that you are not allowed to end your move on top of this terrain feature. That's a pretty good idea. The amount of people sometimes that I see put a model on top of something and I think, no, or try and balance it with another model next to it. I've got blue tech in my hand. I don't, yeah, it just confuses me. And the other one, exposed position, basically states that if you're on top of this terrain feature, you do not receive the benefit of cover. So that's quite a good way of clarifying that if you are on top of some other features, you're still going to get a cover piece, you're still going to get cover, or whatever cover type you're actually on. But if it's got exposed position, you're not going to. Crates is an example that they actually put in there, which is a good one. And I suppose maybe buildings will probably have exposed. You know, if you've got like a flat roof, you could always set up their exposed positions as well. So if you're on top of it, you don't get a save. Now, light cover and heavy cover. Light cover is pretty much what we know and love. It's the +1 to your save. It's the idea is that the shot could possibly, you know, it's got to get through something to be able to get to you, and that something really isn't going to be able to stop or slow the bullet, or las weapon, or laser gun, or rocket, or whatever. And now heavy cover is basically allowing you to have a +1 save in close combat. It mainly gives it to defensible positions, but it doesn't come into effect on the turn that something charges. So heavy cover from a charging unit, and then so a defensible piece of terrain is going to benefit the charger because you need to get within 1 inch of a terrain piece and 2 inch of a model, and you're going to get a +1 to your saving throw. So defense lines are going to be useless for the people using them and a lot more beneficial for the people attacking across them. I'll be honest, folks, I don't get that one either. Next is scalable, and of course you've got inspiring. Scalable is quite easy. It means you can go up and down it. Pretty much everything's going to be scalable in my personal opinion. And inspiring is just +1 to a leadership within 6, but you have to have a keyword. So if it's like some form of special bunker, or you know, it's like a defensible position, you're going to be able to decide on that. I mean, you could, if you've got an orc village as an example, you could state that all the buildings are inspiring to orcs, which would make quite a narrative themed game going forward. But again, it's giving someone an advantage or disadvantage. A lot of people don't like doing that because it's unfair. For personally, it does depend on who you're playing against. Now, I am going to talk about the examples, simply because some of the examples are a little bit crazy. For example, ruins. Ruins is area terrain, not a problem. Ruins is always going to be area terrain. But it's scalable, breachable, light cover, defensible, and obscuring. That's very good. I like all of that. Apart from the fact that some of the buildings I've got are dense. They're quite packed in. And I would consider that to be dense cover, because the dense cover states that if the model's over 3 inches, it's -1 to hit. What are we then going to start saying, you know, because it's obscuring, so it's, when you're in it, you're not obscure, but if you're having to fire through it, is it obscuring? It becomes very, very convoluted very, very quickly, I think, with that particular rule. So, well, I don't know. We'll need to play a few games. I personally think it's going to be down to the player. So I know we've got a big piece. We've got a couple of big pieces at my club, which I would actually class as dense terrain, not because of the fact that they are dense, but because of the high walls that surround it. But one of the areas, if you're overlooking it and you're firing inside, would be quite exposed. So for me, if that's happening, then you wouldn't get the -1 to hit. That being said, it's all going to depend on the player playing it. Apologies, I'm going to rewind back a bit. I did forget about something. One of it is called difficult ground. Now, difficult ground is basically -2" to move. It's no longer in charges. It's for everything. So if you're moving through this type of piece of terrain and it's difficult ground, it is -2". So if someone's got some really heavy duty craters all over the place, craters are actually giving you light cover, they're not obscuring, but they are difficult. So trying to get through that piece of terrain is going to take you a lot longer. It's -2". It basically just says -2" if you move, advance, fall back, or charge. So anytime somebody's in that terrain feature, or you're having to go through it, or anything of that nature, it's just -2", which is very different to 8th edition, because 8th edition you kind of just waltzed through everything, whereas on that one it is going to slow people down. You could even, I suppose, put difficult ground on certain building types if you wanted. Ones that are collapsed, you could state that that is difficult ground. The examples Games Workshop are giving are not going to help, because I know some people are going to be, yes, but in the book it says this. Don't be that guy. Now, a couple of the other examples it gives is woods. Now, with woods, it counts it as dense cover, breachable, defensible, difficult ground. I agree with all those, apart from the fact it doesn't give it obscuring. Now, we've got some big trees at our club, so again, I would actually state that a block of trees, a wood, is obscuring. If you've ever been in a wood and you're trying to get visibility through the damn thing, it's quite difficult. It's quite hard. So to me, they should have put obscuring. The reason I'm ranting about this is simply because I know for a fact there are people out there, and there's people that attend my club that will do it as well, that when I put a piece of terrain down and I go, that's obscuring, they're going to go, the rule book says it's not obscuring. This is what the rule book says. And it's a guide. It's supposed to be a guide to your own terrain pieces. Games Workshop cannot include everything, but they've done very well with these little categories that you can add to terrain pieces. But I know for a fact with these examples, they're going to mess it up properly for a lot of people, I think, personally. And then, of course, the ruined wall section. The reason I bring this one up is that it says it's dense terrain. Dense terrain says 3 inches, and the wall example it gives, I have this wall piece at the club. It is not 3 inches high. So that shouldn't be dense terrain because it's not 3 inches. I don't get it. I don't get it. Anyway, and there you have it. There's my opinions on the rules for this new edition. The terrain rules, even though we've been bigging them up, I think you need to seriously look at your own collection and make your own mind up about what each piece of terrain is going to be and agree before you play the game. The examples that Games Workshop give are terrible. They are not in any way, shape or form, to me, representing, especially the ruins ones, not having dense, depending, again, it depends on your terrain piece. The trees not having obscuring, that's random. That is really random. Some of the other pieces as well not actually having any form of cover, like the obstacles, it just says obstacles and then unstable position, so you can't put anything on top of it. And then it's like, well, does it give you any benefit? No, it doesn't give you any. To me, that would have light cover. So you're going to have to go through your collection, I think, and personally just think, right, that's going to be this, that's going to be this, that's going to be this, and not really, unless you're at a tournament, don't really pay attention to what workshops are regarding terrain features. You decide what the terrain feature is going to do. You decide what keywords it's going to have. Simply because each person's terrain piece can be completely different from the other. Am I excited to play this edition? Now that I've seen all the rules, I'm not sure. This might be very controversial. A lot of people are like, going, yeah, new editions, but sometimes when something new comes out, doesn't necessarily mean it's better. I do think they've tried. I think they've really tried to make sure that that guy doesn't turn up to your gaming club and ruin your games. But then they've kind of not really done it a lot with the terrain features. 8th edition was all about line of sight blocking terrain. You needed lots of line of sight blocking terrain. I've even made some line of sight blocking terrain specifically for 8th edition. And then they kind of help people out by going, hey, it's going to be obscuring. And then only one piece of their example has obscuring, which is ruins, which Games Workshop sell a lot of. So again, I'm wondering if it's money related when it comes to some of the keywords. But that is, of course, just my opinion. Your opinion is going to be different. Your opinion is going to be your own. If you can get hold of, some of the pictures regarding the leaks, highly recommend you do so. It's quite an interesting read for some of the things out there. Download the core rules and give them a good read through as well. Like I say, it's 25 pages, 24 rules. One of the pages is a bit, but it's 24 pages compared to 8, and a lot of it is waffle and clarification. If you have a really good read of it, you'll be kind of laughing to yourself, because you're kind of like, why am I reading this? Why do I have to clarify wholly within and within? Surely the word wholly would, well, maybe we need to look at our education system to make sure that people understand words. But thanks very much, guys. Please like, share, subscribe, hit that notification button if you do want to see more. Apologise that my eyes keep going everywhere in this video. I'm not used to looking directly at the lens of a camera all the time, and I don't do these this often, but I felt like I needed to on this one. I needed to get my opinions out there. And the COVID-19 lockdown has meant that I'm not really in a social bubble to talk about it, so we're going a bit crazy. Right. Anyway, thank you very much. See you next time.